while you're joining us in the chat, feel free to let us know where you're joining us from. And if you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to start stacking them in the Q&A section and upvoting your favorite ones if you don't have a question yourself. In the meantime, I'll do the disclaimer. This content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. Nothing contained on here constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by Draper, Goren, Holm, or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments whatsoever. Boom.
Cool. Cheers.
That was a mouthful.
Well, let's also start the cheers before we dive in with happy birthday, Mark.
Yes.
For joining us on your birthday.
Oh, wow, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
It ruined my dinner plans, but happy to be here. But on maybe a more sort of sober note, I'd just like to, obviously our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to everybody in Beirut and Lebanon. Obviously absolutely incredible what happened today. Never seen anything like that. And yeah, I really hope that they can recover quickly. So yeah, terrible. Anyway, but sober note, and we'll continue. Yeah.
Yeah, that was wild when I saw that trending on Twitter, all those videos.
Unbelievable.
That was unbelievable.
Yeah, never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
But it tells you something. You know, if you don't use blockchain in the movement of chemicals, all of a sudden you might get 3,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate in a warehouse somewhere. Yeah. So anyway,
True that.
Yeah. Wow. By the way, Abhishek, I know you said you don't drink, but what's in the cup?
Oh, it's just some tea.
Okay, we'll let it pass.
Some green tea.
Cheers. Nice. Cool. Should we give it a couple more minutes?
No, let's start in on the introductions and stuff.
Cool. So I guess we can start with Abhishek. Go ahead, tell us about yourself, the company you worked for, how long you've been in the space, and we'll kind of just go from Amber to Mark, John, and we'll end with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Abhishek Gutgutia. I am currently the Chief Product Officer at Chronicled. Chronicled is a leading blockchain-based enterprise software company catering primarily to the pharmaceutical industry. I've been with Chronicle for about 3 years now, but I've been in the blockchain space for about 6 years now. I was at Accenture before Chronicled. I was one of the global blockchain leads there, and one of the, I should say, early rabble-rousers making a lot of noise about blockchain when blockchain was not that hot in the early days. And that's how the blockchain practice in Accenture got established. So big believer in blockchain, big believer in Bitcoin as well, I should say. And I absolutely love the space. I love the energy in the space, the innovation, the possibilities. And we are doing some amazing things at Chronicle, and it's been a wild ride. So cool. Excited to be talking to all of you about it.
Nice. Thanks for joining us. Amber, go ahead and take the stage.
Oh, I'm Amber Hartley. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at BurstIQ. I've been there a little over 3 years. The company was founded in 2015, a couple years before the whole craze. My background, I was somewhat new to blockchain, but I ran the Innovation Center for Catholic Health Initiatives, which is one of the very large health systems in the US. And you get to see a lot of really cool tech come through an Innovation Center, and you get to see a lot of really not cool tech come through an Innovation Center. And my background was in biotechnology and tech. And so when I started learning about blockchain, wasn't really interested in the cryptocurrency side of it, but knew enough about, all of the challenges with data in healthcare to know that it had some really serious potential. So as soon as I got the opportunity to join BurstIQ, which, was really doing amazing things, I jumped at it. So BurstIQ is a global secure data exchange network. We manage sensitive data assets and manage both building identity profiles of sensitive data assets of people, places, and things, and the exchange of that information in a secure environment. So we work primarily in healthcare, but we also bleed very heavily into identity and fintech spaces managing granular ownership, granular consent, and a very complex profiling, multi-dimensional profiling of data. So, happy to be here. Love talking about blockchain, and love talking about all the fun of healthcare and data.
Love it. Thank you, Amber. Mark, go ahead.
No, thank you. And Amber, I second your sentiment. I wasn't too excited about blockchain until really, it came into the healthcare space. I've been in healthcare for 22 years, always on the innovation sort of technology side. So I'm the executive director currently for the Technology Collaboration Center in Houston. We really look for crossover technologies to solve the biggest challenges in various industries. It's been a passion of mine for, I don't know, 10, 12 years. And it's incredible what we've sort of achieved in terms of, some of the technologies in other industries that have made a huge impact in others, and got so many examples. But recently very much got into, obviously blockchain. Blockchain was in the peripheral of mine, I guess, and certainly when you start talking about digital transformation, you start talking about some of the impact where I think blockchain can, and we'll speak about this tonight, obviously, can have. I think, it's such an interesting space. But you're here representing MedMergent, which, even though we founded in 2015 in terms of trying to connect electronic medical records for the purpose of looking for cohorts for clinical trials, some of their technologies really sort of came to light in terms of what's happening with COVID at the moment. So, we've adjusted, and what we're really trying to do with MedMergent is link the electronic medical record, data mining, very much targeting was it people recovering from COVID, and drive them down to donor, blood donation centers. Blood plasma or convalescent blood plasma is certainly something which I think is going to tie us over until a vaccine is really introduced. And even in that vaccine stage, there's a lot of ambiguity in how effective it's going to be, and I think convalescent plasma really is showing a lot of really good positive effects. And so we're using blockchain here really to sort of tie the conversations and the communication with the patients, and letting them self report some of the symptoms that they're having, and at a time that they want to distribute their information to a blood center, giving them that opportunity. So I'm sure we're going to talk about that a lot more tonight, but it's certainly reinvigorated the whole MedMergent sort of piece, and tying in the blockchain has become really quite important. So looking forward to it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for that intro. And last but not least, John, please take it away.
Hey, everybody. Hey, thanks to Alon and Adam and Abhishek and Emrs and Mark and everyone else on the call for joining and spending an evening with us. I'm John. I'm the founder, CEO of Hashed Health. Like most of the folks here, I was early on in the healthcare blockchain space after having been a part of a couple other healthcare technology startups over my career, which has been about over 20 years now. One of which is with Adele El-Masiri, who's on in the audience out there. I think if you look at all the work I've done, the theme of my career was kind of collaboration in healthcare. And despite the successes that Adele and I and others have had in the past, we always have suffered from trust and transparency and incentive alignment challenges that were always really hard to overcome, and always were kind of limiting factors on our ability to solve certain problems. And so in 2015, 2016, got kind of involved in the blockchain space and started hanging out with the DevCon folks in Shanghai, and learning and figuring out that this is real, and there's real smart people out there doing really talented kind of smart things, and started connecting that to some of the challenges in healthcare, and jumped in 2016, started Hashed Health. And so, if you think about where we've been since 2016 in the healthcare blockchain space, I kind of boil it down to 2016 and early 2017 was really market development, community development, ideas. 2017, 2018 was, for us, a lot of advisory and services and ideation work with pharma companies and insurance companies, and then health systems and other technology companies. And then 2018, 2019, you started kind of maturing some of those experiments. You started thinking that certain things could turn into real products, and there were networks that were starting to come together. And then, some of those experiments died away and other experiments started to mature. And we, one of those experiments became a new company last year. So Hashed Health launched its first new spin-out startup called Professional Credentials Exchange. We built a prototype, kind of an early product. We shopped that around. We attracted a network of about 20 big healthcare providers and payers to that network. And then we attracted a co-founding organization to help us take it to market. We attracted some seed stage funding from some investors. Spectrum Ventures, which is a part of Spectrum Health in Michigan, was the lead investor, and we launched that in December of 2019. And so Hashed Health is all about kind of having this process by which we take an idea and validate that idea, both from a technical and a business perspective and a governance network perspective. And then we iterate and intentionally kind of move that idea through a process of commercialization. Our goal is to create new startups that exist outside of Hashed and run on their own. And so we're basically a startup studio for healthcare blockchain initiatives. And so we have a queue of other projects behind Professional Credentials Exchange that include some work in supply chain, some work specific to the insurance and benefits design area, some identity work, and some work around value-based contracting and contract model innovation, as well as a couple other areas. But those are some of the highlights of our initiatives. So again, thank you for looking for the conversation.
And Alon, do you want to give our little spiel, as you're really good at?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thank you, of course, panelists, for joining us today. Adam and I are a part of Draper, Goren, Holm. I am the Goren and Draper, Goren, Holm. We're an early stage blockchain fund and ventures. We like to be the first check into blockchain startups. So, if you're two people in an idea, a very early stage blockchain company, we want to meet you and invest in you. So go to drapergorenholm.com. This particular topic is really exciting for me and for us because we wanted to, I personally just want to learn a lot more about this space. This is one category we haven't yet participated much in. We are mostly in the finance and financial technology side of the technology. So love having these kind of conversations because, we can ask the real basic questions and maybe some stupid ones so that we can all learn together, both us, but the audience as well. So I'm really excited to have you all here, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I think we did have a few, we had some thoughts and initial questions.
I want to start, I want to start by saying, so I know obviously finance has been the main driver in all of this digital space, right? Where is healthcare? And John, you touched upon how we had the 2016-17 area with the big boom, right? And then 18 and 19 have been more ideation and testing, right? Where are we right now as far as adoption of blockchain tech in the healthcare space? You're muted. There you go.
Yeah, my perspective is, we're about a year behind the fintech community. It's still very early. Even for fintech, it's still very early, and there's not a whole lot of examples, but you have a couple of them on the panel here. Of real projects that have product and are have people using that product. So I think it's early. I think to me, having been in the space and doing the work we've done on all these experiments over the last couple of years, it makes sense now why it's moved kind of methodically through these phases. Some would say we're kind of in the valley of despair, at the trough of disillusionment, and we're starting to come out with the real work and the real projects. And I think that's probably accurate. But blockchains.
Okay, Adam, I think we lost him there for a little bit.
We lost him. Anybody else want to chime in?
No, so while I think Adam John is probably most equipped to answer some of the specific projects. I mean, all I can say is, I think everything. John, I think you're coming back.
No worries. Mark, go ahead.
Well, no, I just think, as we've moved forward, I think we're entering in an age where blockchain is going to, and I think Amber's going to, testify to this. We're entering a significant sort of phase where, blockchain as a technology, it has implications in so many different areas, and we can list them all out. But I think as you talk about interoperability, you're talking about the IoT, Internet of Medical Things, you're talking about sensors, you're talking about systems, you're talking about just enormous amounts of data now that are sort of flowing through the consumer or the patient, and that patient's got this control, or certainly should have this control of this data. And how do they make that data accessible to the different entities? So when we had a very sort of a singular control in terms of the electronic medical record in these healthcare systems, and by the way, I think these healthcare systems are spend billions of dollars implementing these epics and these cerners. They didn't do it with the blockchain in mind, because the blockchain technology sort of really came to the forefront prior to those implementations. And so now, how do you sort of say to a big a big system, how do you think about blockchain in this whole sort of progression of the EMR once you've spent already $1 billion and $1 billion for? And so I think what's going to drive the blockchain now is going to be these individual smaller sort of projects as they sort of lead to medium-sized, bigger projects. But I think, with this IoT, and as I sort of said, all these sort of data flows, which are going to affect, this interoperability and this move from, fee-for-service to value-based medicine, the patient's going to control all that record, regardless. And so that's where blockchain really is going to come into it, because how does the patient really have that sort of security, trust, truth, knowing that that data is not going to be shared? I mean, we could talk about a million other things there, but I think just in terms of the overall picture, blockchain, it has to come about, because the patient is going to become the owner of their record. So, But the specific opportunity, or the specific things that John was talking about, are these smaller projects which have been incremental now that are going to lead to these larger implications.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, it's interesting what we saw. I think 2018, PwC put out a report saying that about half of healthcare systems are doing something in blockchain, doing some sort of project. And I think what we've really seen is that in the last probably 5 years or so, there's been this really strong shift that healthcare systems are really starting to see the potential of blockchain, and it's not such it's not so out there anymore, and it's not such a kind of the perceived risk of blockchain. That perception is starting to really go away, as I think the healthcare industry is starting to understand that security and data security and blockchain are not mutually exclusive. And that blockchain can really actually enhance security in really significant ways. And I think that has caused a pretty significant positive change in how blockchain's perceived in the industry. So we're certainly seeing a big sort of push in that direction towards wanting to see what it can be used for, not just sort of in the kind of traditional ledger sense, but how it can really be, to Mark's point, kind of a linchpin in interoperability. How do you achieve interoperability at scale? And I think one of the things that we're seeing is, even at the federal level, we're starting to see like FDA is starting to put out guidance around blockchain and starting to take notice and starting to prioritize blockchain projects. So we know that it's happening at the federal level. Of course, this huge push towards general consumer data privacy and data ownership pushed by GDPR, but now really aggressively moving at the state level. And we know that's going to come at the federal level. All of that is really kind of pushing what started out as kind of Hipaa and this emphasis on access to medical records. And we sort of had this perception that the person should really own their record. But in practice, it hasn't really ever been realized. You know, for practical purposes, most of us, you know, you don't own your record, your provider does. And that's really starting to change in really significant ways. And I think the industry understands that blockchain can really be an important component of that. And, you know, outside the US, I think what we're starting to see is that the emphasis around interoperability and specifically how you can use blockchain for these very large scale, like national health information exchange programs. Blockchain is a big part of that. And we're seeing countries move very aggressively into blockchain around EID programs, national health information exchange, and how you really bring those two together and create bridges between these programs with this sort of unified system that really relies on blockchain as the basis for it.
Is the reason for, so I probably have to break this down a few different ways, but I think Abhishek, you unmuted yourself. I think you were about to chime in, so I apologize for something.
Yeah, I was.
Answer. Just
no.
What I wanted to get towards, and you probably know, you would probably be good to answer this, is that people are, you said about 50% of providers are looking into blockchain technology, and it seems like there is more adoption in testing it. There's more adoption in using it. Is this a bit of FOMO of following the others and this new thing? Are people more confident in this as an industry? And I got my kids peeking in all the time too. And where I was going with is this something that's being adopted on Hyperledger, on Corda, are people using the Ethereum? Are public networks for this stuff? What are the what's the standard? And is there a standard? Are different groups using different technologies? I'd love to hear, from an industry overview, which blockchains are being used or which technology is being adopted.
So maybe if I can chime in on that. In our case, the technology that we've chosen to rally around is Ethereum, and specifically parity. That's where we started off. But just recently, we did about 9 months ago transition to parity substrate, which of course is very different from Ethereum, and we are really, really excited about substrate because we really think it's a technology and a set of modules that gives us a lot of flexibility in really crafting the blockchain that we need for a given use case. And we've been already seeing a lot of success with it. It just gives us a lot of power in terms of development flexibility and, coding a lot of very complex contracts that can be quite cumbersome with Ethereum smart contracts specifically. Mm-hmm. And especially if I can touch upon some of the things that we are doing to answer the earlier question as well. Yeah. We've been lucky to have been working with the pharmaceutical industry in a very, very deep way. We've been working with the largest manufacturers and the largest wholesalers and other industry players for over 3 years now. And Amber, to your point earlier about the FDA initiative, we are actually as Chronicle leading one of the largest FDA pilots, blockchain pilots there is, which has about 30 pharmaceutical companies involved in it. And the FDA recently, we published the FDA pilot reports and so forth. And so what we've done within the pharmaceutical industry is in terms of adoption and product go live and so forth. We launched our first product in the supply chain space last November, so November 2019, and that has been undergoing testing so far, and it is going to go live this November. So it's been designed to cater to an industry deadline per the FDA, and the industry deadline moved from November 2019 to November 2020. And so they're going to go live this year. So it's already being tested. The fear of blockchain has gone away. And frankly, in our case, we never positioned we were focused on solving a business problem using blockchain. So we kept the blockchain exposure to a minimum and really kept everybody, our entire consortium, focused on solving business problems. And that's why we've been immensely successful so far. So they'll go live with the first product.
It sounds like blockchain in this case, in the healthcare world, blockchain exposure at a minimum almost feels like we're talking about COVID, you know. Everybody put on their mask, keep the blockchain exposure to a minimum.
That is sometimes necessary. Well,
you got to say in the past, I mean, you had complete trust that your healthcare system was going to keep your electronic medical record safe. But what assurances did you have? And so, you know, anything that sort of moved it back to my space is going to be, was a consumer sort of agreeable, I would presume. You know. Yeah. So yeah, I agree.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Abhishek, but
oh no worries at all.
See that in the blockchain space, right? There is a bit of you know, a smoke and mirrors in the way we market it, because some people instantly look at blockchain and think Bitcoin, think scams and hacks and things. So I would assume in a very conservative industry like healthcare, you know, pushing for more modern technologies might be tough.
I think that was certainly, we saw that probably even as recently as maybe a year ago, that when we were talking with large payers and large healthcare systems, and even some of the large enterprise service providers into healthcare, I think that was true. I think that's shifting really quickly. Now that there's a better awareness of what blockchain is in particular, and not this sort of rote association between blockchain and cryptocurrency, I think that's changing really quickly. And what we've actually seen is that, you know, even more recently, and I would actually even argue in part because of COVID, the awareness of what blockchain can actually accomplish and how it can address some of these really major problems that the industry has been struggling with that have really been highlighted because of COVID. I think the industry is starting to realize very quickly that blockchain is really unique in its ability to solve some of these really challenging problems that are just really front and center right now. So we've actually, I think, started more recently being much more forward about the fact that we incorporate blockchain. I mean, you know, for us, blockchain is, and I think, Abhishek, we're sort of in a similar boat, that blockchain is one component of what we do. It's one in many things that we bring together in order to create kind of a whole platform and a whole set of services around that. It's not the center, you know, it is one of the pieces, both philosophically and structurally, of what we do. And so we talk about it much more freely than I think we did probably even a year ago. But yeah.
No, and to pick up on what Ahmed.
Yeah, I'm
go ahead.
No, I was saying to pick up on Ahmed.
It's definitely a part of the.
Yeah, go.
I was just going to say, I agree. It's part of the stack. It's not, you know, in most of our conversations, it's not the lead anymore. You know, it used to be the lead. You know, we used to get conversations because we were a blockchain company. It's more important to, you know, solve a problem. And healthcare is a very practical, pragmatic industry, and you got to approach those things with a kind of a solutions mindset. And in terms of how you solve it, you know, Alon asked about protocols. We've built on 6 different protocols now. We like Substrate, we like Fabric. For certain projects, we use Corda. And we've tried some other things. We don't think the world is kind of a one-size-fits-all world yet. And I think that protocol agnostic approach allows us to optimize for the use case rather than having some specific protocol be the answer that we have to fit every solution into. And so, you know, if you're looking to, for example, make programmatic use of sensitive information through a smart contract, you don't have a whole lot of protocols to choose from these days. If you're looking to scale up privacy and confidentiality and not depend on, you know, zero knowledge proofs quite yet, then you have very few protocols to choose from. And so, you know, it's a very dynamic world, and it's hard because you have to place some bets. And that's not all, so you have to kind of figure out, are you going to try to solve something today and use something that works today, or are you going to place a bet on a protocol that you think is going to be the protocol for the next, 2 or 3 years? And that really is for us, it's something we debate a lot.
John, I think that's a really good point. And, we feel really, really strongly that one of the ways that blockchain can really establish itself as a core framework for the healthcare industry is through interoperability between blockchains. And we actually, we've really prioritized partnerships to create that interoperability in some of the projects that we've pursued, because we think it's really important. And I agree with you. I don't think we may never get to a point where there's sort of one single blockchain protocol that kind of does everything. And I actually, I'm a personal believer that competition is actually a really good thing for the industry. It sort of pushes everything to get better. And so I think the more that we can, as an industry, embrace that interoperability and find ways to really, create connections between these different systems, the better off for the industry it's going to be. Because you're right, it's not a one size fits all. We definitely have companies come to us and want to use the BurstIQ platform, and based on what they're trying to accomplish, we have had situations where we say, you could use the BurstIQ platform, but for what you're trying to do, you may not need it, and that's okay. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good point.
Yeah, all of a sudden you've got 1,000 blockchain sort of platforms out there, and you're having to create thousands of APIs. If all of them, it doesn't achieve too much sort of interoperability at all. We're almost creating a new problem. Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm. And some of this stuff, may not need a blockchain, right? If you're not, and there are things on this, every blockchain, but in healthcare, they oftentimes mean something that's not Bitcoin, and it's not optimized for cryptocurrency, right? It's not publicly verifiable. It's not totally censorship resistant. Maybe it depends on the characteristics of the business problem. Yeah. And the good news is that you have this wide spectrum of things that we call blockchain, a lot of which are not. Like Corda is not a blockchain; it doesn't have blocks. QLDB is certainly not a blockchain. It's cloud with cryptography, but it's very low cost. And for some use cases, that might be a solution that works. And it's all about kind of making the sweet spot between when to use the technology, what new innovative business model is enabled by the technology, and can you drive a network to adopt the technology. Between those things that you want to make as big as possible. And using this whole spectrum of technologies allows you to widen your spectrum of the solutions that you can solve.
Yeah, but you talk about sort of increasing the fluidity of supply chain, in different industries and stuff like that, and it's transfer of data and various things like that. And so I agree with you. While not everything is blockchain related, certainly when it comes to healthcare, what you want to do is from a supply chain, or certainly from the overall sort of healthcare delivery model, you want to sort of grease those sticking points and make everything faster, better, lower cost, everything else like that, and obviously the movement of data now is obviously key for that, and and blockchain plays a huge role in that, if you call it blockchain. And I know that blockchain's going to move on and probably be called something else in later years and so forth. So but again, it's how do you make the whole sort of ecosystem move more freely, and data movement secure, safer, and obviously driving down costs.
And I think at the core of that comes a discussion of regulation, right? Amber, you name dropped Hipaa. Maybe I'm butchering.
Yeah, Hipaa.
Hipaa, right? Hipaa. Now, does blockchain tech meet Hipaa standards? And I asked that because I read an article recently saying that Hipaa prohibits the use of mathematically derived encryption of protected health information, because the encrypted information can potentially be re-identified, right? Is that still a thing? That was back in 2018. I haven't found anything updated about that, but is that still the situation right now?
I would say it's a little bit, I would say it differently than that maybe. So HIPAA doesn't actually, it doesn't prescribe how you secure the data. Just in the regulation itself, it just says you need to protect the data. And then it's sort of up to the industry to figure out how to do that. Blockchain in and of itself, there is no compliance with HIPAA whatsoever, just sort of core, like basic vanilla blockchain. How you actually implement it and how you can actually, there's a couple different ways that you can do it. So there's, if you're using something like an Ethereum where you're not going to put any sensitive data on chain, you're generally managing that data off chain. And then you're using Ethereum to manage the smart contracting process, manage access, but the actual physical data transfer is still between these sort of centralized databases, a series of databases. That can be, that definitely works for certain circumstances, for sure. What we generally found is that, so we put data on chain, and then we created HIPAA compliance and go through a SOC 2 Type 2 audit every year for HIPAA compliance for the entire network, so that all of the data on chain and all of the exchange that happens on chain is fully HIPAA compliant. So all of that.
I don't think you. We asked you the question of what blockchain you're building on. Is this Hyperledger or?
No, we built our own. It's the BurstIQ blockchain, I suppose, for lack of a. We call it Burst Chain.
Did you build it off of any existing blockchain?
No. Part of the reason we didn't use any existing blockchain is because they didn't have the they didn't have some of the capabilities that we needed to be able to put data on chain and to be able to manage the security of the data. So we built our own. Tyson's actually on here, and he's the guy who dreamed it up. So. Oh, cool. If you ask me any questions that I cannot technically answer, I will grab my wine and point at him.
Nice, cool. Yeah, I assumed so, and I apologize for interrupting, but I assumed so because some of the things you were saying, I'm 100% sure are not even possible on the Ethereum blockchain or some
Correct.
of the others. So I was thinking something like Corda or Hyperledger, but customized. So cool to know.
Yeah, and you know, part of the reason it's been really interesting to see how, you know, the ability to actually put those really highly sensitive data assets on chain has really allowed us to do a lot of things with the platform that we really just couldn't have been able to do without it. You know, managing an end-to-end national health information exchange, and all of the hundreds or even thousands of different endpoints who have to be able to access that data, managing individual consents, as well as the broad-based data governance across those complex systems. All of that really requires that you have the ability to manage a fully revocable data exchange system where you have the granularity of things like, you know, in healthcare, even the ownership of a data asset can be really complicated. You know, it's not as simple as patient owns this data, all of my EMR record, for example. You know, I may have a lab result that I own outright, or I may own my name and my social security number in my record, but I may not own, for example, if there's a doctor's note in my EMR record that says Amber's a difficult patient, I don't necessarily have any rights to own that. You know, that's my doctor's note on how to run their business. And so you start getting very complicated very quickly in terms of who owns those data assets, how those data assets are allowed to move to different entities and endpoints and people and facilities and organizations and even IoT devices. That ownership and consent structure starts getting very, very difficult to manage if you're using this system of centralized databases and trying to manage data transfer between them. And so fundamentally, being able to put that data on chain and manage the immutability and the attestation of the data asset itself, as well as the contract process and the ownership and access profile for that data is really huge when you're trying to manage these processes at scale.
So how do you actually define ownership then, right? Because, okay, you said a doctor's note wouldn't qualify as something that's yours, but like lab results, test results, right? That would be considered yours. How do you I guess, differentiate what's yours versus not yours?
Yeah, so that's a really...
a voice over that, right? What if the patient believes, wait, no, this is mine. You're managing me. I'm paying you to basically give me my results, regardless if I'm a bad patient or not.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. And the answer is, I always hate to say this, but the answer is it depends. The answer is really that it's a regulatory question. And I don't think the legal standard of ownership has really been settled yet when it comes to healthcare data. And I think we've got a long ways to go. You know, right now we have this patchwork of regulations in terms of data privacy and ownership, some of which are generalized to consumer data, some of which are specific to healthcare data. They vary state to state. They vary outside of the U.S. And I don't think that that's going to get settled anytime soon, because even once you get a federal law saying this is how we establish ownership and who owns what, it's probably going to end up in the court system. So you're still going to have interpretations over time. And I think the ability, you know, what we really see is that what really matters is the ability to stay flexible. And as long as you can establish these ownership rules and be able to update and modify those ownership rules as the guidance and the law changes, then you should be able to adhere to whatever is the current guidance in whatever jurisdiction you're practicing.
And these are the short-term, sort of medium-term sort of problems. I mean, longer term, in terms of myself owning my entire medical record, if there's some information out there which is, you know, to do with my medical health, and it's not in my medical record, that should be seen as just, you know, irrelevant. And so, you know, I can sort of bring this information in and somebody else can sort of verify it or whatever it is. But I think what you're sort of saying there is that, you know, ultimately, you know, somebody has to have control and ownership of that record, which is myself. And any other data outside of that is really sort of fictitious or irrelevant unless I claim it to be relevant.
Well, I think, Abhishek, from what I understood from your platform is some of these processes and things are automated, right? So, because what I'm worried about is you're right, like I might own a record, but I don't necessarily want to have to be the one to allow the transfer of the records if, for example, there's an emergency, if I'm dying in the back of a I almost said cab, in the back of a ambulance. I want those, you know, people that are working on me to get the relevant records and data immediately, and maybe even a little extra data in that moment, right? I don't want to be holding on for dear life of my data in that moment. How do we look at the benefits of this technology because I almost feel like all these things are consumer benefits for privacy and things like that. But at a certain point, the more I hold on to my medical records, the more detrimental it could be in some kind of emergency or, you know, situation. So there is a plus side, because once it's all digitized, it should be able to be transferred around the world to any doctor as quickly as possible to help me, whether or not I'm at the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think, I mean, maybe to tie it in with, you know, the approach that we are taking, which is very different from, you know, other approaches to how blockchain is used to begin with. You know, we are talking about using blockchain as a shared ledger, and we don't approach blockchain as that at all. We look at blockchain purely as a rule enforcement layer. So in the context of healthcare records and how that information is shared, if you imagine for a second, if we take the patient out of the picture for a second and we just talk about two healthcare systems that want to share information. So the patient has been admitted to an emergency hospital, and that emergency hospital wants information from the usual hospital for that patient. How can they get that information right away? And the rules of data exchange can be encoded on the blockchain, and the receiving, this emergency hospital can request information, and the sending hospital can send information, and though the rules around sending that information can be checked against the blockchain, and the blockchain as a rule enforcement layer can make sure that, you know, everything is kosher, all the rules are being followed. Yes, it's okay for you to send that information. Yeah. That's how we are approaching blockchain. And so it's not so much about the patient ownership, which is also important, but we have talked to a lot of healthcare systems, and the more immediate problem seems to be how can we freely exchange information between each other while complying with the Hipaa regulations? And as a rule enforcement layer, blockchain really shines to enable that.
On the financial services side, we understand that, right? In digital securities, one of our portfolio companies, Onera, is building it's a customized public-private implementation of Hyperledger that actually enforces regulation on the blockchain, so that if I'm a company, I can sell my securities to Abhishek, but I can't sell it to Adam because maybe he's not an accredited investor or he lives in a country where he's not allowed to participate, but the blockchain will enforce those rules.
Exactly.
So in the medical field, you're doing similar things.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll sort of build on that, the way that we handle it, so because we have both the data asset itself as well as the contracting of rules on the chain, we allow you can use the ownership structures to build like custodianship models. So a health information exchange is fundamentally a data custodian, and they are managing the rules and all the governance around how data is allowed to move around this HIE system between all of these different hospitals. So they can actually affect the data permissioning and the access to that data, as well as the rule enforcement, using a single framework. And it allows them to manage things like, Alon, to your point, like a break the glass scenario. Somebody shows up in an ER, you need immediate access to their data, but they can't give you consent because they're unconscious. So obviously what you really need is the ability to immediately provide access to that data. You can go back and you can get consent after the fact, or at a very minimum, you have transparency into who the provider is, what are the credentials of that provider who requested break the glass access to that data, so that the patient can go back and have full visibility into what data was accessed by whom, when, and hopefully they actually, remember the incident and can say, oh, okay, that was probably okay. And so fundamentally, I think, to your other point, because, if everybody has true ownership of their data assets, you have sort of this multifaceted, like you're going to have some people who want to keep all of their data completely private, and that should be okay. You're going to have scenarios where you have those break the glass events and you have custodian and escrow models where you can handle those kinds of situations. But if you provide people with the right incentives and you allow people to actually even monetize or extract value from their data and treat their data as an actual asset, then you are giving people the right incentives to actually share that data with the tools that matter to them the most. So for example, if I've got my health data, I don't want to expose it to anyone, but I can get $500 off of my health insurance if I consent some of my data to this AI-enabled health coach that is going to help me with my fitness journey, for example. Those are the kind of permissioning events that you can manage, where you're really incentivizing people the right way so that they can make decisions that are right for them based on whatever whatever is their version of their healthiest, best, I want to share my data because it makes my life better, really.
I mean, we see that with, you see that in small cases, I think, with large employers and things like that. I think there's actually car insurance companies now where, I'm not talking about like, you don't get in an accident, you pay lower cost, but they can actually see and check and verify how many miles you've driven. And if you don't drive very much, why do you need to pay insurance of someone that commutes? So there is sort of analogies into the real world here outside.
Well, I think when you talk about clinical trials participation, you think about, everybody obviously values data, and if you're the owner of your data now, and you provide access to your data to certain things like clinical trials or other things like that, there potentially should be a monetization of that event. And so this whole tokens idea, everything else like that, incentive. The transfer of your data, whether anonymously or not. I think that this is a huge sort of opportunity for, something like clinical trials, which are really under participated in, and certainly the understanding of disease progress and everything else like that. A great opportunity where blockchain and incentivization tokens can come into effect. Yeah.
What about the availability of data? I feel like in this day and age, the ownership is one thing, but when I own something or when I expect something, I feel like everyone in this day and age is very impatient and we want everything yesterday. And what would have been an acceptable sort of ETA on sharing data or receiving data even just a few years ago would not be acceptable today. And I almost feel like ownership and the availability of data are probably easily confused by the consumer because that's one thing that sort of these legacy old systems in the financial world or in the healthcare world are the things that drive us nuts, the people that don't understand it. Like when you go to a hospital and they say, yeah, we'll get you your medical records, it might take 2 weeks or something like that. It just doesn't make any sense in this day and age. Is this a part of the issue when building on the blockchain, how fast you can transfer things? Josh Lawler says they still use fax machines. I know a fax is faster than waiting the 2 weeks most of the time, but nobody has a fax to receive it. But is this something you guys are building into the systems? Is regulation a big part of that hurdle in timing, or is it just a legacy technology problem that's being fixed with solutions like your guys's?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the latency of the data challenges. I think that's one reason over the last 4.5 years we've focused primarily on B2B solutions rather than consumer-focused solutions. We think that the real dreamy, highest value use cases are these really exciting, decentralized, consumer-focused solutions, but it's probably not the easiest place to start, at least until COVID, it wasn't. There are certain non-technical things that are happening now that are driving us to reevaluate that idea. But primarily we've been focused on B2B because the bar has been set so low in healthcare in terms of, data availability and data latency and all of these things. Someone just says 50% of healthcare providers still use fax machines. I think that's probably true. And the other thing is, one of the big issues in healthcare is design this system, and believe me, it's working as designed. We design healthcare and it works perfectly the way it was designed, which is to have a transaction-focused system where the financial layer, the banking layer sits up here, and the claims layer sits right here. It's basically looking at transactions, and then you've got all of these data silos around the clinical elements of that. And so there's no, if you ever want to look at value, you've got to start piecing together these different data layers and try to match up the financial layer to the data layer. And then for any value-based approach, you're retrospectively reconciling that account a year after the episode's complete, and you're totally detaching whatever incentives that you would want to drive. They're totally detached from the actual event you're trying to incentivize because of all those delays, as an example. And so one of the most exciting things, at least from our perspective, is to collapse together the dollars and the data. And we talk about data, it's the financial data and the clinical data, and really kind of redefine the relationship between commerce and care, to have it be more of a real-time relationship, which enables lots of different incentivization structures and new contracting models. The B2B space to us has always seemed like a better place to start because of a lot of those limiting factors.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was muted. It's very interesting. Should we jump in a little bit?
Yeah. So the first question comes from Chris White. Which health standards are easiest to integrate with blockchain while being compatible with existing EHRs and payer systems? And in parentheses, too early for FHIR? Maybe you guys can define for those listening who don't know what EHR means and FHIR is. And I throw the question in the air. Whoever wants to approach it first, go for it.
I think at this point, if it's anything to do with New Zealand wine, I'll take it. Anything else, throw to Amber.
Okay, which standards are easiest to integrate for EMRs? So we've seen recently there's been more of adoption around FHIR. So EHR is an electronic health record. I have no idea what FHIR stands for. Tyson probably does, but he's not in the hot seat, so we're just going to call it FHIR. So FHIR, we're actually seeing stronger adoption of FHIR more recently. It's been, so we've seen a little bit of Smart on FHIR. We see a lot of HL7. In our case, everything sort of happened. Oh, he's literally slacking me what FHIR stands for, which is awesome. So we're going to do it right now. Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. There you go. Fresh from the CTO. So what we've really seen is that, especially outside the US, in national HIEs, most of them are trying to integrate using FHIR. Still a lot of integration on HL7 and kind of all the standard interfaces. As long as you're using a set of standardized APIs, you can pretty much receive data in any format. We generally pull in data, in all sorts of different formats. So that hasn't really been a problem. I would say kind of the biggest issue isn't really that. It's more, I would say, political than anything else, because, EHR systems have broad ecosystems around their EHR, and it has really taken some federal efforts to mandate interoperability between EHR systems, and I think that's still kind of in the works. Health information exchanges still kind of sit as the center point between those for the most part. So I hope that helps answers the question.
You else want to chime in? If not, we can move on to the next question.
No, I think that's awesome, and I'm not going to chime in on that, but was it just in the interest of sort of time and stuff, and obviously very topical. I was just wondering if anybody else on the panel and anybody else has really looked at what's currently going on in the environment with COVID and certainly around contact tracing and and obviously what we sort of seen. I got involved with telemedicine back in 1998, 97. I haven't seen an acceleration in telemedicine use like that in all those 20 odd years that we have seen in the last 4 or 5 months. But that brings huge sort of patient privacy sort of issues and things like that. But in terms of contact tracing and other sort of things like that, I'd love to hear from anybody else in the panel or anybody else who's participating to sort of hear how blockchain is really helping with that effort.
Yeah, we've certainly seen a fair amount of it, mostly outside the US. I will say that the most sort of successful implementations of like Immunity Pass and contact tracing have generally been in more authoritarian countries because they just have better access to the data and better control over the data or more control over the data. And really part of that is that there has to be, in order for those programs to really work effectively, there has to be a connectivity between EID programs and how you're collecting like geolocation and identity and passport information and how you're connecting that to health data. And so those really have to be kind of deeply connected systems. And so what we've seen is that the countries that already have EID programs and national data programs in place and are collecting geolocation data are actually doing that pretty effectively.
John, I know you wanted to mention something as well.
Yeah. Please.
Yeah.
Go.
Sorry. No, I was. Across our the portfolio that we have, kind of all got cycled with COVID, and some of the things that had a pretty high show of March are now like kind of on hold, and others really started to accelerate. Some of the supply chain initiatives, obviously, with a lot of the PPE shortages and inventory questions, and a lot of transparency and the need for what you've seen is kind of like a real new appetite for regional collaboration in supply chain activities, because a lot of the traditional strategic partners that health systems use, like GPOs and others, were kind of disappeared during COVID. I mean, they just didn't have anything to offer, and these are the people that they have always relied on to help them solve big problems. And so it kind of created an open space for people to learn how to fish again. And so a lot of the health systems we talk to have started collaborating, sometimes with people who they used to compete with in regions, to solve PPE issues and understand inventory challenges and introduce new distribution methods and things like that. So I think that's one area that we've seen some interesting activities around. Another area is in kind of self-sovereign identity. You know, people, the way I kind of look at self-sovereign identity is people talk about it like they talk about blockchain. No one really, everyone loves to say the word self-sovereign, but no one really kind of has the same definition of what that really is or what it means. You know, the ability for a consumer to control their information has never been more important than it is now, especially as these immunity passports move beyond surveys and temperature checks towards something more clinical. And so all of a sudden, I think that is becoming a really, really important issue that we're seeing a lot of interest in. And so those are a couple examples.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And what we saw there was a lot of public announcements and a lot of good effort. The fight is in us and the Microsoft Alliance with their bot chats or chatbot and various things like that. But what none of them were doing was really sort of trying to integrate with the electronic medical records or big data sets, whether it's the payers and so forth. So looking at, can we identify we can obviously identify the people who tested positive, but coming out of that, what was the right time frame in terms of sort of identifying them, educating them about the ability to sort of provide plasma, but then getting them down to the blood centers. And obviously at the blood centers at that time, they had no other business other than collecting of plasma. There were no elective surgeries. They were in financial strife. But and certainly I think some of these public announcements really were overwhelming them with patients that didn't have the correct, it was at the tighter levels, let's just say, in their plasma. So there was a real focus right in an early stage by a number of us that sort of said, look, we have to integrate with electronic medical records. We've got to communicate with the patients. But if we are communicating with the patients and then letting them sort of self-diagnose, well, not self-diagnose, but certainly sort of or put in the right amount of information so that the education can match that, then how do we let them at that stage give access to the blood center about their personal information to get contacted with? And so it was a perfect opportunity. So certainly an example of a blockchain or distributed ledger, maybe anonymous, what we call a distributed ledger. So there's a very interesting sort of thing. So I was just wondering if anybody else has sort of seen anything. It's obviously COVID is going to be with us for a long time. The vaccines are, hopefully, they're going through a lot of success at the moment in terms of their progress through the trials. But really, their mass sort of distribution is going to be well into 2021. And even if it does have a lot of success, I think the CCP or the plasma is going to have a enormous benefits even in that sort of plasma sort of, and I can go on for ages. So I think at this time, blockchain's got an enormous potential in giving people the the confidence that they can be a part of certainly understanding when's the right time to provide that plasma autonomously, and then be putting contact with the local blood centers where they can provide that that light, that the cure is in us in their blood. And so it's something which I think blockchain this would be an amazing example to be a showcase of how blockchain could actually sort of do that. So looking forward to everybody's contribution. We welcome everybody to be a part of this, and Amber, would love to introduce you to the team and everybody else, Abhishek and everybody else. And yeah, this is something where we've got a wide range of people, from Oracle Cloud in terms of high performance computing to S-File in terms of data mining, and a bunch of other Kinetic stuff, which is a blockchain development. And it's just it's a great group. It's a non-for-profit, I would say, at the moment, just because there is no profit. But I think certainly what we're trying to do at the moment is really increase the supply chain of plasma around the country. They're very successful in creating what we call plasma corridors from the northeast, where they had the problem initially, now down to the south. The south, where we have obviously incredible amounts of need for the plasma. So again, the blockchain element is that confidence that it gives people to be a part of this whole donation network, where they might not want to do it because of the fear that it might affect their insurance, or their information is getting used in a bad way. I've got a project up in Harlem with Harlem Silicon, and so again, just would love everybody else to be a part of this. It's a great thing, and I think plasma is going to be something that's going to be touted now for the next 6 or 7 months until vaccines are available, if not a couple of years.
So Mark, I apologize that I completely lost my connection, but you're talking about the Cure is in us?
Yes.
Yeah, we're actually a part of it.
So you're talking about the Fighters in Us, which is the Microsoft Alliance, and so we are a part of that. I'm involved with that. Their thing is the chatbot. It's very much a public awareness campaign rather than something what we're doing, which is introducing a interface to electronic medical records and introducing a blockchain element to it, which they don't have. And not that we're trying to compete, we're trying to work in tandem with them. We just think that there's one approach which is ultimately going to be more successful in terms of giving patients the confidence and certainly identifying at the right time, very targeted approach, when your tidal levels in your blood are going to be the most active to go down and donate. The worst thing you can do is go down to a blood center, take a place, and donate blood where your plasma levels are not the right time. However, saying that, now with CSL and Takeda and all the others from the COVID-19 alliance, they're trying to produce an HIG shot, which is a hyperimmunoglobulin shot, which will give you at least immunity, hopefully within within 2 weeks to a month period. I think this is going to be really key in terms of opening up the economy and everything else like that. So, there's multiple different paths of different groups, trying to at least get the economy back together. I just wanted to say that I think we're the only ones using a blockchain sort of element with that, and really love everybody to sort of be involved if they can. Yeah.
For sure. Well, thanks for sharing that. I just want to ram through the last few Q&As before we get into networking. So I'll kind of do like a flash round. I'm going to throw a question, and whoever wants to just chime answer it, we'll move on to the next one. We'll keep repeating that for a few. All right. So how is the current consumer education, and what is your role on educating traditional healthcare institutions about blockchain? John, maybe you could chime in on this one.
Yeah, if you look at adoption, like the insurance companies don't need to be educated anymore. Thanks to people like Abhishek and his counterparts at Chronicled and some of the work we've done in US and Europe, the pharma companies don't need to be educated anymore. We're still looking at, the health systems are a mess, right? Like most of them are kind of worried about keeping the lights on. They don't want to be educated. They want to solve problems. And if you go in and talk about blockchain, or if you go in and talk about touching their Epic system, they're going to show you the door pretty quickly. So, you got to go to health systems to, with solving hair on fire problems, or you're not going to be successful. And so we've gotten pretty much out of the business of education. All of the blockchain, education has kind of been commoditized at this point. It's not that you don't need it. It's just, it has to be a part of any implementation or any kind of service that you're providing normally. It's kind of been rolled into everything else that you do, because what you'll find is when you get in there, people who say they understand it still need a lot of educating. because they have some misconceptions.
Cool, thank you. Okay, Abhishek, this next one is for you. What are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to building blockchain-based healthcare products?
Oh, I think the biggest challenge is making sure that everyone who's going to participate in the network agree to the same protocol and agree to the rules of engagement within a given process. That takes a lot of time, and that's what we've spent a lot of our time doing in the pharmaceutical industry, is to bring everybody together, all the interested parties, around a common problem, and agree on a solution and agree on a protocol that can be then implemented in blockchain. That is absolutely by far the biggest challenge.
And how do you get to that consensus? How do you, what kind of things you have to put in place? Because everyone has different interests, right? Everyone has different wants. So how do you create a system that kind of accompanies everybody?
Well, it starts with the use case identification. As I was saying in the beginning, it's about identifying a problem that a number of parties in the ecosystem face. So, for example, we're working on something that is a problem faced by the drug manufacturers, the drug distributors, as well as some financial institutions within the pharmaceutical industry. So, and all of them have massive overhead, massive pain points associated with that use case. So it was easy in this case to go to them and say, look, all of you are facing this issue. All of you have the shared business process. So why don't we come together to solve this problem? And because they were seeing a lot of savings and benefit in that, they came together. So bringing them together, and then after they've come together, really focusing on the problem, understanding the problem in a very deep way, and then solving it for them keeps them engaged. Right? That's what we've been doing for more than 2 years now. That's how we have built a lot of credibility and traction in the pharmaceutical industry, is by truly, like, we have gone very, very, very deep into the weeds in the industry to understand what the problems are and solve it uniquely with blockchain. Cool. And to the earlier question, we've also done a lot of education, and that's been appreciated as well. We've taken a lot of time to tell them about blockchain in a very deep way, which has been hard but very beneficial.
Cool, thank you. Okay, next question. This one comes from Christina. What are your thoughts on Bill Gates' recommendation of having proof of vaccine/recovery, which could be tracked with NFTs and digital identity? How do you see the evolution progressing? Feel free, anyone, to chime in.
I guess my personal opinion on this is that I think there certainly is value in having, it's basically talking about immunity passes. I think there is some value on it. I think the hard part is that the science is still somewhat unsettled on how long immunity lasts. We obviously don't have a vaccine yet. And even when we do get a vaccine, we don't know if the vaccine is going to be a one-time or whether you're going to have to re-up it periodically. So I think there are just still a lot of kind of basic science questions that have to be resolved before we know whether things like immunity passes are really going to be valuable. And even when we start to resolve that science and have a better sense for, what the virus actually does, sort of post-recovery, I think we're probably going to end up in a few court battles around this issue. People who can't get an immunity pass for whatever reason and fight it in court. And so I think it's going to take a while to see whether they're really effective. Certainly, like I said, a lot of countries are doing it already.
Cool, thank you. Next question, this one comes from Crispin. Follow on to Chris. Are EHRs receptive to blockchain, or is it looking like yet another proprietary system to them?
I don't know about you guys, but we've talked with Epic and Cerner and others, and haven't had a whole lot of luck in getting from those guys. But we have friends at those companies. They're just kind of, I think they're just sitting on the sidelines waiting. I think the life looks pretty good for them right now, and they probably don't want to be the first ones to jump into a different boat. So I think it's TBD, but there's a lot of entrenched interests that are happy with the way healthcare works today, and so I'm not thinking those companies are going to be our early adopters.
They're not going to have a choice. Ultimately, as we move to value-based, reimbursement models, with IoT and wearables and sensors and all the data that's coming from us, where we go from to proactive, from reactive, was it reimbursement models? They're not going to have a choice. They're going to have to implement a blockchain element to this. It's undeniable. They've lived the good life. 1.4 billion in MD Anderson, 1 billion for Methodist, 1 billion for this, 1 billion for that. I mean, these are incredible numbers that obviously being charged for the implementations of your likes of Epics, and unfortunately there was never a blockchain element in this, and now it's going to have to shift. All the groundwork's been done in terms of the potential for interoperability and stuff like that, but there has to be an interoperability when you start talking about the patient-centric sort of EMR and so forth. So it's going to come.
I agree with that. I think the one thing I'll add to that is that I kind of suspect that health information exchanges are moving pretty aggressively into blockchain, especially outside the US. So I kind of suspect that the EHRs are going to get pulled into it through health information exchanges.
Guys, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your time, for the energy you put, for all the insightful information. I want to kind of go around, starting at Abhishek, moving our way down to Amber, and all the way through John. Tell us where we can find you, where we can learn more about your project, and then we'll conclude into the networking.
Well, the best place to learn more about Chronicled is chronicle.com. Simple as that. I'm on Twitter as Shakeisms, and on LinkedIn, of course. That's where I can be found. Nice.
Thank you. Amber?
Best place to go is BurstIQ.com or ResearchFoundry.com, which is our research-focused version of the platform. You can actually get direct access to all of our APIs and developer tools through Research Foundry just by sending us a note. We can sign you up and you can get free access to the platform. So those are the two best ways. I am not on Twitter, but I am on LinkedIn, so you can find me there as well.
Thank you, Amber. Mark?
Well, thank you, Amber. We've got so much in common, but obviously on LinkedIn, at medmergent.com, but also Technology Collaboration Center in Houston as well. Lots of places. So love to engage, love to keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And last but not least, John.
Thank you, everyone. Look, hey, blockchain was born for this moment. So we are blockchain. This community thrives in times of uncertainty. Community, none of these projects are competing with each other. Their healthcare is so wide open in terms of use cases and opportunities that I just really encourage anyone who's kind of watching to get involved in any of these awesome projects. I am at John G. Bass on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, hashtelf.com, and then you'll kind of some of our projects on that, and then others are coming soon as well. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate you having me. Thanks, Alon. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, guys. So before we bridge up into networking, I'll kind of give you the spiel for anyone who's new here. First things first, I encourage all the speakers to stay for the networking session. It's a lot of fun. If you can't, understood. I know, Mark, it's your birthday, so go spend time with the family. But for those who can stay, the way it works is I'm going to end presentation mode, and it's ridiculously crucial that you turn on your cameras and your microphones. Otherwise, you're going to be very, very lost. Okay, so be sure to turn your mics, turn your cameras. We'll interact with each other. You're able to bounce from table to table, meet people from all over the world. It's a lot of fun. So here we go. Ready?
I'm going to stay for the next at least 40 minutes. I've got to go quickly to the restroom because we've been drinking so much wine, but I'll be right back.
Thank you, everyone.
See you on the floor. Bye-bye.